idealization of marriage is a universal thing when it comes to people who are assigned women at birth. And in fact, it is a lifelong training. And of course, even if you don't see it, even if your parent fails to do it, society will always pick up the slack. So for me, even though I come from a family that was largely very relaxed, where I kind of got incredibly empowered, I had unisex toys. My mom never did this weird thing I've heard people say, where they're like, no, you sleep so late. Where you go? Your husband. I've never heard that because it was never, I think it was never also in reality that if I got married, I would get married to somebody who would be expecting me to do the work, and up in certain hours of the day. I don't think it's what my parents envisioned for me, but what I envisioned for myself was worse. So anyway, I grew up in society as well because I didn't exist in a vacuum, and I remember just hearing things about uncles coming by, and talking about, yo, the cows, we can't wait for the cows. To this day, I have brothers who know I'm not getting married, but who still lament about the kind of cows, their shares that they're going to get from me. That's what shocks me. It actually shocks me. Anyway, so yeah, I grew up hearing that, but I think the one thing that jumps out to me is when I was in junior school and we learned names of the names people get, like maybe if you're an excellent farmer, if you are an unmarried man, an unmarried woman, and or you are a widow or widower or whatever. And it was in a Shona class, and then that's when I learned about Tsikombi. I think I'd heard it before, but this particular incident jumps out to me. And she'd been talking about it, and I could tell it had incredibly negative connotations. So I wanted to know, when exactly does somebody become this bad thing? So I didn't get to become this bad thing. And I remember the teacher saying straight up, 29 years, that's a bit late. And so in my head, I carried with me that there was a kind of duty. I didn't reject marriage immediately because I saw it as a duty. It is something that I ought to do. And it was like that for a long time. I remember, in fact, when I was in high school, this had an impact on how I related to people and how I carried myself and the kind of anxieties that I had. Now, first of all, I don't know what it is because, well, even though I was anxious, the streets were not agreeing. The streets were slut shaming me heavy. I wasn't even doing anything, but the streets were slut shaming me. And I just kind of, there's a lot of internalized misogyny that comes with all these experiences. And I thought, okay, so I shouldn't get to 29. My mom was 22. So I guess this is what it's supposed to be. And in my entire life, there was no experience of having a crush. There was no experience of feeling like, oh my God, I will marry this person. To this date, I've never had this feeling of, oh my God, I want to marry this person, because I have no interest in collapsing my life into somebody else's. And I think that's what's at the center of it. I don't feel like collapsing my life, into somebody else's. I don't feel like having somebody dictate what my love life should look like, when it should happen, and what the circumstances of my love life should be. And so, yeah, that really stuck out to me. But I kind of felt like drawn to this, like, of course, it's a duty. You just kind of have to get married. And I think it is only within the last maybe a year, 2 years, that I've recognized that people get married for love. Like, women have a kind of a sense of love and admiration for the people they married. I genuinely thought people got married because it is what it is. And in fact, like, before we leave this kind of area here, this kind of thought, I remember learning not about loving men. I learned about the kind of characters men had to have. So a person had to be good, they had to be prayerful, because I grew up in the church. I'm no longer a Christian, but I did grow up in the church. And, they had to be a Christian, they had to be a provider, they had to be just a well rounded, respectable person. And so for me, finding men was always kind of a matter of ticking boxes. I never saw that as being something that I had to be, drawn to, that I had to like men, or it was never my thought. I did not see the correlation. And so it was also where it was very easy to let go of something because there was no love there. For me, marriage was always about duty and kind of moving towards this kind of set goal. You marry somebody because they're good, and that's it. You kind of have a sense of loyalty to them. Very traditional. That's how I grew up. And so, as I was kind of coming into my adulthood, developing my politics and really looking within me and unpacking the trauma that I experienced child abuse throughout the education system. And I was kind of unpacking how that made me feel, where I was, and starting to really zone in on my emotions on something. And I noticed I didn't want to be talking to anybody. Like, I wasn't seeing any prospects. I didn't want to collapse my life. I didn't want to get married. I didn't think it was possible. And I was very aware of the negative connotations surrounding marriage, like I've said, surrounding not being married. So took a couple of years, thought about it. And I remember, because I belong to feminist spaces, I remember somebody gave me something to latch onto. And we're talking about just how unethical marriage is, the institution of marriage and its abolishment. And the way I jumped onto, when you see, sometimes when you see, this is how people join cults. When you have something that speaks to what you feel, but you can't verbalize it, I lashed onto it immediately, because I was like, this is the issue. Once this institution is abolished, then I don't have to be a part of it. I don't have to go through the kind of humiliation and loss of social currency that comes with not being married. And the more I thought about it, the more I decided, actually, I mean, of course, I do think certain things, the way we prioritize the hierarchies of relationships, should be abolished. Families look different, relationships look different. The inclusion of people of the LGBTQ community, partnerships, kind of different ways of fostering and all of that. I still heavily believe in it. But I lashed onto it, and then I decided, actually, I don't need to be caring about what other people think in terms of, making life decisions about myself. And so I made this decision. I was incredibly sad and very emotional as I look back at those comments and whatever. I was very emotional because I was announcing something that I knew would have a direct impact on how life would be for me. And because I was so young, I was afraid of changing my mind. But that was my truth then, and it remains my truth now. Praise God. Hallelujah. No, I played too much. But it was like, okay, I made this announcement. I said I wouldn't be getting married. And I remember it was a big thing. My uncle ended up telling my mom to talk to me about just keeping certain things private, because I was going back and forth with lots of people saying you learn when you're older. I remember meeting a lot of people in person who would talk about, oh, your sister XYZ used to say she was not getting married. She's now married. And to see the kind of, actually, even talking about this sister of mine, to see the kind of uh, imprisonment that she had to experience for daring to have a certain perspective. It's almost like a kind of place of humiliation for women. The changing of, if your mind as a woman is seen as something that's meant to humiliate you. And so a lot of women are supposed to be afraid of saying certain things so that they don't experience humiliation if they change their mind. Oh God, what will you do? Will you beat me? They can't do anything about it. It's them who will be eating the biggest chunk of their Lola money anyway. So what is it? But for me, that day will never come. Anyway, it was also something. So there was that. There was the you will change your mind. And because I was so young, I kept thinking maybe they know better than me. They didn't. They're all stupid. And I'm wise. I have to say it. It is what it is. Come and beat me. But it was what it was. And even though, of course, in that moment, it didn't feel like that. In that moment, I felt like, let me get ahead of people. Let me get ahead of the speech. Let me tell them now. So later, I can always say, but I talked about this back in the day. If you're a person who doesn't want to get married, let me tell you this. Let me be clear right now. You don't need to do what I did. Don't announce anything. If they see you unmarried, they can just be doing their prayers there. You can be living with your 4 boyfriends and going on vacations. France, what is it? What can they do? They can be praying there and being humiliated by themselves whilst you live your life. The people who did that live the best life. Because if I tell you the kind of things that I've experienced, I've had to go low contact with my relatives because of this. Like, it's not even a matter, it's not joking or anything. I recognize they have no capacity to see me as a human being, to validate my experiences, and to take my word for something. It would be a constant back and forth of me being infantilized, dehumanized, of them continuously speaking over me. And being a person who is assigned woman, I feel like it has the kind of multiplying effects, the kind of way people treat you. First of all, they're speaking over you, they're not taking your word for you. I can't tell if you're a fool, if you're sexist, honestly. Do you not hear me? And so for me, it ended up leading to a lot of isolation, because I didn't want to be in community with anybody who didn't take my word for something. I didn't want to be in community with anybody who went out of their way to make the things that I find valuable a part of an extended joke. I didn't feel like that, which then leads to what this entire conversation was supposed to be about, and it is, I guess, my pros, my cons, things I've learned. Now, first thing first, which I didn't recognize then and that I recognize now, is society is created to isolate single women, and they're not even the least bit ashamed of acknowledging it. I remember I recently talked to a brother of mine, and I said, I will not forget how my relatives told me that I would live a life of loneliness when I lived a life of community with them. And my brother was saying to me, it's not the case. People care for you, and certain things are nice to do with a partner. But so many people say to my face that I would live a life of loneliness when my entire life I'd lived with them, in community with them. Where they say my life had been lonely till then. And that made it very easy to recognize who was valuable in my life, who counted themselves as an active member of my life or not. Second thing, there's this attempt to limit the choices women are aware of, and this is particularly the case when it comes to love. I remember when I talked about not wanting to get married, a lot of people coming to me and asking if I didn't want to fall in love, if I never wanted to experience love. But love and marriage are not the same thing. And so, in even the way the question was presented to me, it was so I would not be able to even think of the existence of love, of companionship, or anything outside of marriage. And so it's either you are a person who's loved and married, or you're not. And this is even evident in the way we kind of respond to people who have long lasting relationships that don't end in marriage. If you're in a relationship for 10 years with somebody and you're not married to them, if that relationship breaks up, everybody would say he wasted your time because he didn't even marry you after 10 years. He didn't love you. But that's not the case. You can marry somebody who came to grab your money, who came to share half your resources, or do God knows what. And if that relationship, that marriage lasts 10 years, people are going to say, how could you have seen that? He actually married you nicely. And so the way people conflate love and marriage is very shocking to me. The third thing is people have a huge problem with taking women's word, and valuing it, taking seeing women as seeing women as people with agency is very difficult for people. Women's choices are always seen as something that can be changed, and as long as a man hasn't said something, then it is not final. So whatever decision that I make, if I say I don't want to get married, um, then it doesn't count, because I'm saying it as a woman in isolation. I need a woman, I need another man who will come and validate this experience for them, who will maybe be in a relationship with me and say, oh my God, this one cannot be married, or who will make me so in love that I would change and let go of all the ideas and dreams that I have for myself, so I can take whatever this man has and keep it. The fourth thing is society makes it very difficult for relationships outside of marriage to flourish. Now, the reality that a lot of people might not want to acknowledge is it is by force that people get married. So let's say I was in a relationship with somebody and we're not married, we don't live together, whatever kind of arrangement I decide to be in. Um, if I was to die, they would not recognize that person as my partner. And I find that it also bleeds into other relationships. I always give this example. The person, one of the people who stood close to me for years, for more than half my life at this point, is my best friend. She would not be valued at the same position as my sister. In fact, a cousin of mine who's been wicked to me will have more say in what happens in my life. There currently exists no kind of legal way or legal route for me to make sure my best friend is kind of acknowledged and seen as the person who has rights to me, equal rights to me in death and marriage, in all kinds of processes. It just doesn't exist. My best friend, anybody who I love, without marriage, they are not going to be recognized. They will not make my funeral arrangement. They will not be able to uh, make decisions about me or whatever at the hospital. They will not get my money. And of course, I know you can give somebody power of attorney and all of that. But I don't want to give somebody power of attorney, because in a normal relationship that is valued in society, these decisions would be made in, combination with other people who love you. Everybody would come together to do what is right by you. So yeah, you're forced to get married to people. I will not be doing that. It's okay. I'm donating my body to science anyway. The last point that I'm going to make is the idea that women have a choice to not get married is oftentimes a farce. Most women who don't want to get married will end up married, and it is not going to be because they wanted to or they changed their minds. It's because society gives them very little room to kind of wiggle on about. I am very privileged to have moved to Germany and to be able to kind of sustain myself. Had I remained in Zimbabwe and, knock on wood, had something happened to my parents, I would have been left in a society where I would have no other options for mobility, for upward mobility without marriage. For a lot of poor women, a life where you're not married means a life of constant dehumanization. Even when it comes to divorce, I have lots of brothers. I don't meddle in their affairs. Nobody can say and lift up their hand and say, no, the tete, speaking about me, that I have been meddling in their affairs, because I know my position as an unmarried girl in that family, and it is what it is. So I know my position and I know how society views me. And for a lot of people, in order to get some kind of progress, in order to kind of get some kind of respect in society and experience some kind of rest, marriage is the only solution. And so for me, marriage is not legitimate until no, until opting out of marriage is an option, and not through divorce, simply as a default position. Actually, I lied. Last thing, we get to celebrate people that we know want to get married. When they get married, we are happy for them. There's no equivalent for the reverse. Even though people know I don't want to get married, no one celebrates with me every year that I achieve this. Even when they know that in society it's something that's so dangerous for women to do. And I find that to be absolutely bescheuert, to be absolutely ridiculous. But I'm going to find my own ways of creating my own milestones in life. I think this year that I'm 25, I'm really recognizing how huge of a feat that is. And I don't know what the life looks like in terms of partnership and relationships. I've been disinterested in relationships. I haven't been in relationship or anything. I don't even seek out relationships. Anybody who knows me in person knows I don't do that. I live my life of quietness, of um, self satisfaction, and that's just what it is. Anyway, I know this video has been super long and probably 3 people are going to watch it, but I have gotten everything out of my chest, because if I don't make a video about it, who's going to sit down and ask me? They all think this is a joke. But yeah, I do think I laugh, but honestly, there's nothing that gets me to not value somebody's opinion more than their kind of infantilization of me. Like, that's the one thing that should be like, no. And it goes for everybody, it goes for anybody who wants me. If you think you're going to marry me, think again. Don't waste your time. Find you a good church woman and marry her.